Business. I've become a distinguished composer since we broke up.
Distinguished.
Yeah, they need a little help here, so I...
Bing Crosby, the legendary voice behind the iconic song White Christmas, was the epitome of elegance on stage. But that was all just a facade, because Crosby was in truth a cold-hearted villain to those closest to him. While always appearing as the model father, Bing Crosby was the one responsible for the indirect deaths of 3 of his own children. The house by Lake Toluca, once the place where Bing Crosby and his family first built memories, now stands abandoned, silent, and gloomy. The old walls covered in mold reflect the shadows of an indelible past. On an April day in 2025, Jason, a curious and brave soul, stepped into that house uncovering something no one could have expected. In the darkness of the house among its empty rooms, he found an old notebook containing painful confessions, chronicling the dark obsessions of Crosby's children. Are we remembering a legendary star or a ruthless man who destroyed the lives of his closest loved ones? Join us as we unravel the story of Bing Crosby's rise to fame and expose the falsehoods behind his public image. Bing Crosby, born Harry Lillis Crosby Jr., was one of the greatest entertainment icons of the 20th century with the timeless hit White Christmas. However, behind the bright lights of fame, there were dark corners of his life that he skillfully hid demons in his relationships with his children, making it almost impossible for the public to see. Crosby grew up in an Irish Catholic family in Spokane. As the 4th of 7 siblings, young Harry lived in a modest middle-class home where his father, an accountant, and his mother, a devoted woman, raised their children with love and discipline. From an early age, Crosby displayed a lively personality, a love for sports like baseball and golf, and a passion for music through choir performances at church. The nickname Bing came from his love for the comic strip The Bingville Bugle, when a neighbor dubbed him Bingo, a name that later became his brand. Those childhood years full of laughter and innocence nurtured big dreams in young Harry. When he entered Gonzaga University to study law, Crosby initially seemed destined for a traditional career. However, his passion for music overtook everything. He dropped out in his senior year to join the Rhythm Boys, part of the famous Paul Whiteman Orchestra in the late 1920s. With his smooth voice and crooning style, using a microphone to create an intimate feeling, Crosby quickly stood out. Performances with the Rhythm Boys laid the foundation for his solo career, opening doors to fame. Crosby's confidence and natural charm made him a captivating figure, as if he was born to be on stage. By the early 1930s, Crosby had become a solo star with a string of hits like Just One More Chance and Please. His warm, approachable voice won the hearts of millions, especially during the hardships of the Great Depression. He didn't just stop at music, but expanded to radio with his show Kraft Music Hall, where his wit and excellent performances attracted millions of listeners. Crosby's career reached its zenith with the song White Christmas in the film Holiday Inn, 1942. This recording, with its gentle melody and nostalgic lyrics, became one of the best-selling singles of all time, estimated at over 50 million copies. During World War II, the song became a morale booster for soldiers far from home, and Crosby, with his gentle smile and comforting voice, became a symbol of optimism. His career soared further with the film White Christmas, 1954, where he starred alongside Danny Kaye. The scenes of him singing beside the Christmas tree, his eyes sparkling and his voice filled with emotion, made the audience forget their troubles, as if the world was dreaming with him of a gentle, white winter. Not only successful in music, Crosby also shone on the silver screen. He appeared in over 70 films, most notably playing a priest in Going My Way 1944, which earned him the Oscar for Best Actor. His Road to series with Bob Hope, with their natural humor and explosive chemistry, became classics. In every role, Crosby presented himself as a simple, likable man, always ready to spread joy. The public adored him not only for his talent, but also for the warmth he exuded. A friend, a brother always present through radio films or recordings playing in every home. However, behind the perfect man image lay a harsh reality that the public knew little about. Crosby, despite being an idol for millions, carried a dark side. His first marriage to actress Dixie Lee was not a romantic love story, but a silent tragedy, with Dixie living in utter misery. Crosby and Dixie met in the late 1920s when both were budding stars in the entertainment world. Dixie was more famous than Bing at the time, beautiful with a powerful voice and a promising future. But in a world where the spotlight always shines on men, women like Dixie often only got a brief moment to shine. She chose to give up everything for love, only to follow a man who didn't belong to her. In 1930, they got married, and just 6 months later, Dixie filed for divorce, citing the reason that we could not live happily together. Deep inside, Dixie felt the silent helplessness between two people who could no longer find each other within their shared home. Dixie left shedding the role of the wife, the keeper of the hearth, the one standing behind a man on his path to becoming a legend. But then in those days of running away, she began to realize her heart still couldn't sever its connection with Bing. She confided in a close friend in Agua Caliente, tears streaming down her face over an unfinished glass of wine, saying she missed him so much it hurt. And then, as if some invisible thread pulled them together, Bing appeared. He didn't blame her, didn't ask questions. He simply quietly helped her back home. This time, Dixie returned as someone who had given up all her own dreams, accepting the role of a silent shadow in her husband's life. Dixie bid farewell to her career and returned to a life of kitchen chores, diapers, and long nights waiting for Bing to come home late. He began to become an icon, the man with the smooth velvet voice and the serene smile that melted the hearts of America. But behind every song he sang were vast emptinesses that Dixie had to bear alone. She gave him 4 sons, Gary, Dennis, Philip, and Lindsay, and gradually she no longer recognized the woman in the mirror each morning. Loneliness is a silent killer, and Dixie in the grand house by Lake Toluca slowly sank into alcohol day and night. It started with a few sips in the evening to ease the emptiness. Then it was a glass of wine in the morning to begin a day with no one to listen. When alcohol became the only thing that made her feel alive, it was also when she lost everything. Dixie drank at all hours just to forget the painful reality. The children had to witness their mother staggering during the day, falling to the kitchen floor, wine spilling on her nightgown, her eyes hollow. Gary, the eldest, later recalled with a choked voice, "I still see Mum lying on the sofa, not knowing if she was asleep or passed out." And when I shook her awake, the smell of alcohol was so strong I had to turn my face away. Those memories haunted them for life, not as wounds to be blamed, but as a dark patch they tried to understand but could never truly reach. And then tragedy struck, as fate always waits at the doorstep. In December 1943, while the family was taking down the Christmas tree, the light hope and fragile peace of a year just past, an electrical short caused their house to burn down violently. The fire destroyed photos, original recordings, and prized trophies Bing had once held up with pride. But more importantly, that fire consumed the last fragile sense of safety between them. What remained were Ash's panicked children, a drunken mother watching her husband bow his head before the wreckage, and a family broken beyond repair. There was a reason Dixie sank into immense sorrow for years, and that reason was Bing Crosby. If Crosby was the ideal man on the silver screen, he was an entirely different person once he stepped into the family home. Behind the mask of serenity was a distant, cold father, and at times, a cruel figure who shattered the very souls of his children. Bing Crosby was a symbol of 1940s America, a gentleman poised and the ideal model for every family. But to his 4 biological children, Gary, Philip, Dennis, and Lindsay, he was nothing more than a towering shadow, distant and full of hurt. In his later memoir, Gary referred to his father as a saint in public, but a tyrant at home. That statement wasn't impulsive anger, but rather the echo of an entire childhood stolen. Bing wasn't often home. Instead, he threw himself into work at a near manic pace. There was a year when he made up to 4 movies, while also recording songs for radio and performing across the United States. But what his children could never forget was not his absence, but the times when he returned. Every time Bing Crosby stepped into the house, it was like a storm passing through. He didn't come to hug, to ask about their well-being, or to act as a father. He came with a list of things to correct, things to fix. Shouting, slapping, even corporal punishment. This was his way of teaching. For Bing, love wasn't about tenderness, but about strict discipline. He believed that Hollywood kids born into luxury had to be hardened to avoid becoming spoiled. But what he never understood was that while the lash on the skin could heal, the wounds in his children's hearts would never fade. Crosby sent his children to boarding school when they were very young. No gentle goodbyes, no tears from a remorseful father. Even when Dixie Lee was slowly losing herself in alcohol and illness, he wasn't there. Crosby sought out other places to fulfill the emotional void left in his home. Every night, he turned to actress Joan Caulfield, gentle, youthful, and far removed from the pain Bing left behind, who made his heart beat once again. They loved each other quietly, a secret relationship hidden from the public, from the children, and from the crumbling life he had. Patricia Neal, another lover of Bing, recounted in her memoir that Crosby had confided in her about Joan, expressing his desire to marry her and stating she different from Dixie. But Neal continued, she realized that we were all on the same boat, a lonely boat, only able to see his back when he left. The women who passed through Bing's life, as well as the children he once held in his arms, were left behind with broken hearts and one question that never had an answer. Did he ever truly love us later when Lindsay and Dennis, 2 of his 4 children, eventually took their own lives? People still wondered, was Bing Crosby's silence worth the price of the tragedy left in the wake of his own bloodline? He sang about Christmas, home love, and peace. But his house had never known those things. Only cold rooms, quiet footsteps, and the memories of children growing up in the shadow of a father too great to love them like a normal man. Crosby allowed life to continue as it always ruthlessly passed over the broken people. Bing returned to the spotlight with timeless recordings. He became the king of Christmas, the familiar face in every American home each winter, but at home, Dixie grew increasingly silent. Illness knocked at her door after countless bouts with alcohol and chronic sickness, eventually ending her suffering. In 1952, when Dixie died at the age of 42, she was no longer mentioned as the talented, beautiful actress she once was, but simply as Bing Crosby's ex-wife. There were even rumors circulating in the media about a sleeping pill overdose. Her health had steadily declined over the years, eroded by loneliness, depression, and alcoholism, until the last light of her life faded away. By the time Dixie was bedridden, her body was but a thin shadow of a once brilliant past. Her once glossy blonde hair now frayed her smooth skin, marred with purple bruises from sickness and despair. In the delirium of her final days, she still whispered the name of the man who had once been her whole world, Crosby. Dixie begged Crosby for one final thing: to see him once more, to hold his hand, as they had promised to stay together until the end of their lives. But Bing Crosby didn't come. At that time, he was in Paris, working on an unfinished film project, placing fame above the final plea of the woman who had given up everything for him. When Dixie breathed her last, only the cold silence of a woman passing in solitude remained. Then at the funeral a few days later, all people saw in Bing Crosby's eyes was emptiness. He stood there, silently, solemnly, without a single tear. People called him strong, said he was maintaining his public image. But for the children, for those who had witnessed Dixie wither away in waiting, that silence only deepened the pain. Crosby had chosen to maintain that distance as he had done all his life. A cold and indifferent detachment to the core. After the tragic death of Dixie Lee in 1952, Bing Crosby seemed freed from the cage that had held him. Nothing could have been more painful for Dixie and the children than seeing their father repeatedly appear beside famous women: Pat Sheehan, Inga Stevens, and even Grace Kelly. Until Crosby met Catherine Grant, a young, gentle, and intelligent actress, he once again entered into marriage. Catherine, 3 decades younger than him, was a complete contrast to Dixie. Catherine embodied a new beginning, bright, innocent, and full of hope. They married in 1957, and soon after, Catherine withdrew from Hollywood to dedicate her time to the small home they were building together. They had 3 children: Harry, Mary, and Nathaniel, a model family that Crosby, now older and less hot-tempered, seemed to want to make up for his past mistakes. With this second family, Crosby was a different kind of father. Crosby woke up early to take the kids into school, play golf with them every weekend, and quietly read by the fireplace at night. Nathaniel, the youngest of the new family, once recalled that his father never once raised his voice or laid a hand on them. It was a tender, peaceful memory. This was almost unbelievable compared to the damage Crosby had caused to his children with Dixie. Gary Crosby, the eldest son from his first marriage, wrote in his memoir that his father frequently attacked him with a belt buckle. The beatings occurred in silence and fear, with no protection, no shelter. Gary described his childhood home as a military camp with strict discipline where emotions weren't allowed and laughter was a luxury. This was in stark contrast to the children of Catherine, where he was gentle and present. As for the children from Dixie, Crosby was a stiff, distant, and cold. They felt replaced when their father found new happiness. All the intimacy, all the moments of love were now reserved for the three younger children. And they, the first children of Bing Crosby, could only watch from afar. Bing Crosby may have found peace in his marriage to Catherine Grant. But that peace, whether real or not, was built on the emotional ashes of his firstborn children. In 2025, the public was further saddened as they saw the image of the grand house by Lake Toluca, once the home of Bing Crosby, Dixie Lee, and their 4 sons, now covered in the dust of time, standing silently like a mute witness to the tragedy that once unfolded within. The old days now existed only as vague echoes, lurking in the cracks of the crumbling walls and faded curtains. The house had been abandoned for years, a moss growing in dark corners. The glass windows fogged, reflecting the grey sky of Lake Toluca, a somber mirror to the past no one wanted to face. The roof tiles were cracked with many spots, collapsed, revealing broken beams like the ribs of a dead beast. Weeds grew thick around the entrance, covering the steps where once small, joyful footsteps had danced. The white-painted walls were now stained with rust and green algae. The glass doors weren't shattered, but they were so fogged that no one could see inside. On the other side of the glass, there were only the shadows of wrinkled curtains and the dim light of a room that hadn't been entered in years. The iron gate in front of the yard was rusted, stuck shut from long disuse. Inside the yard, the children's swing still hung there. The frayed rope, the wooden seat, shifted off its axis, gently swaying in the wind like a whisper from the past. This was not just an old house. It was a tomb without a headstone, hiding away loneliness, fear, and secrets that were never meant to be told. That's because in the final years of their lives, all 3 of Bing Crosby's sons, with Dixie, Gary, Dennis, and Lindsay, returned to that house and never left again. At 3 different points in time, they each returned to the old house where they had once grown up, or rather, where they had spent years abandoned. And the saddest part is that all 3 died there, in the same upstairs room overlooking the lake. The press called it a death by overdose, but no one could explain why they chose that very place to leave life behind, the place that had once caused them so much pain. Jason Myers was not a historian nor a professional ghost hunter. He was just an ordinary man with a quiet obsession to understand why Bing Crosby's 3 sons, who had grown up in luxury amid the glitz of Hollywood, chose to die in the same place. Therefore, on an autumn afternoon in 2025, Jason drove alone to Toluca Lake. The wooden door groaned as he pushed it open. The smell of mildew and thyme wafted from within, as if the house itself were breathing through its painful memories. Jason walked through the dusty hallway where family photos once hung, but had now fallen, their glass frames shattered. In the living room, the old fireplace was stuffed with ash and a large piano lay covered in dark velvet. But he didn't stop there. There was a nagging feeling that urged his feet to climb the stairs. At the room at the end of the second-floor hallway, Jason found something that would haunt him forever, an old wooden box hidden behind a torn curtain. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, faded and worn, its pages yellowed with time as if they had been scorched by it. On the first page were handwritten words, faint but heavy with meaning. "I can't bear that father any longer. Even after he died, he still lives inside me like a shadow that can't be chased away." Jason recalls that as he read the first few pages, it felt as if he were intruding on a pain that had never been allowed to speak. The notebook was not merely a diary. It was an indictment never read aloud in any courtroom. The three sons, Dennis, Lindsay, and Philip, had written alternately out of order, without names, but with their handwriting, their anger, and their shattered memories. They wrote of their childhood, spent in boarding schools abandoned, as if they were surplus baggage in places so cold that the only letter they ever received was their report card. They wrote of the sound of a door locking at midnight, of beatings with their father's belt without a word of explanation. Those images kept repeating like nightmares that could never be shaken off. Dixie, their mother at the time, was a woman lost in alcohol, unable to protect them, unable to protect herself. She was often unconscious on the kitchen floor, leaving her three children to wander in sorrow. They wrote that from childhood to adulthood, every time they turned on the TV and saw Bing Crosby singing White Christmas. They felt a lump rise in their chest, as if a lie was being replayed over and over, year after year. The past haunted them so much that Lindsay Crosby, the youngest son, once hailed by the press as Bing's darling boy, admitted in the notebook that he lived in a dark spiral, with no escape, alcoholism, depression, and a broken relationship so broken that his father had considered sending him to a mental hospital, as if Lindsay were a broken machine that needed fixing. It was no longer fatherly love. It was a silent sentence. Lindsay wrote in his journal, "I am a shadow, his shadow, and I hate him for that." But the saddest part was that, despite his hatred, Lindsay was always seeking his father's approval, an approval that had never come. The greatest pain did not come from their childhood, but from the realization as adults that Crosby and his three sons later lived in the warmth, love, and smiles they had never known. Nathaniel Crosby was taken golfing by his father, held after every match, while Lindsay had to send himself to rehab, and Dennis remained lost in an unnamed depression. The notebook was a haunting memoir, so much so that Jason said that when he closed it, he cried, not because he knew them, but because he understood them. He understood what it felt like to be transformed by someone who should have been the one to love you into the deepest wound. When Jason left that house, he didn't take the notebook with him. He placed it back in the wooden box where it had remained silent for nearly 3 decades. And as Jason stepped down the front steps, the rain began to fall. Small, cold, persistent raindrops, as if the house itself were finally crying for those tragic fates. After Dixie Lee's death, many hoped Crosby would soften, look back at the past, and try to heal the wounds. But instead, he continued to dive into controversial relationships, as if trying to fill the emptiness with fleeting affairs. He once dated model Pat Sheehan, a dazzling beauty of the time who graced the covers of pin-up magazines. But the real shock came in 1958, when Pat Sheehan, who had been Crosby's lover, married his son, Dennis Crosby. From being his father's lover to becoming his son's wife, this story exploded in the media, and the Crosby family sank even deeper into a labyrinth of tangled mess, with no way out. Less than a year later, Dennis was caught up in a notorious lawsuit. A woman named Marilyn Miller Scott accused him of being the father of her illegitimate daughter. The trial was shrouded in scandal, and in the end, Dennis lost the case, officially being declared the biological father. But what hurt even more was Bing Crosby's reaction. He not only remained silent in public, but according to close acquaintances, he never even visited his granddaughter once in his life, as he had always been distant from his son, Dennis. Contrary to the pain his children endured, Crosby lived out his final years without ever once lowering his head in regret. He never publicly acknowledged the pain he had caused, never offered an apology to the children who had died under the shadow of the figure of father. As Bing Crosby aged, the world around him changed. The classic sounds of his voice were overshadowed by the electric guitar, and the vibrant energy of Elvis Presley followed by the storm that was the Beatles. A new world was rising, one that did not have room for him. The spotlight that had once silenced every stage became just a long shadow behind the history of music. In 1977, the year that should have marked the glorious end of a 50-year music journey, turned out to be a fateful moment. During a television performance to honor his career, amidst applause and stage lights, Crosby suddenly collapsed. He fell from the stage to the hard floor, reaching for a backdrop as if trying to cling to his old, faded glory. But the fall shattered his disc, a severe injury that left him unable to walk for a long time. His daughter, Mary Crosby, later said tearfully that fall should have killed him. But no, fate had something else in store for him, and for us. 4 years later, on a dull autumn day, October 13th, 1981, Bing Crosby decided to take a break in Spain. Crosby only brought his golf clubs and a few friends. On the golf course, he was still a charming gentleman. When he reached the 9th hole, a few construction workers recognized him, and as a reflex from a lifetime of being an artist, Crosby smiled and agreed to sing. He sang "Strangers in the Night," soft, proud, and no one expected that would be his last time. After that impromptu performance, he finished his round of golf with joy. As he returned to the clubhouse, he told his friends with a smile as light as the breeze, "That was great. Best golf games ever, guys. Let's go get a Coke." Those were the last words Bing Crosby ever spoke in this life. Just 20 yards from the clubhouse, he suddenly collapsed from a massive heart attack. Crosby passed away at the age of 74, leaving behind a massive legacy of silences that no one could fill, unhealed pains. One of Crosby's greatest legacies was his timeless music career. With over 1 billion records sold globally, he is one of the most successful artists in history. Beyond music and film, Crosby was a pioneer in entertainment technology, leaving revolutionary contributions. He was one of the first artists to use magnetic tape recording technology, improving sound quality and changing how radio programs were produced. Crosby also invested in Ampex, contributing to the development of video recording technology, laying the foundation for modern television. His radio program, Craft Music Hall, with millions of listeners, shaped how stars interacted with the public through the airwaves. These innovations not only enhanced the entertainment experience, but also opened a new era for the media industry. Crosby's legacy also lies in his humanitarian and charitable roles. During World War II, he performed tirelessly for the troops, from military bases to special radio broadcasts bringing joy and motivation to those on the front lines. He donated millions of dollars to charity, especially to organizations supporting children and veterans. After his death, the Crosby family continued this spirit through charitable foundations bearing his name, such as the Bing Crosby Foundation, which supports education and healthcare. These activities cemented his image not only as someone who sang about love and hope, but also lived for those values. Crosby also left a cultural legacy through shaping the image of the versatile artist. He was not only a singer and actor, but also a producer, businessman, and innovator. His career is proof that an artist can transcend the boundaries of fields, from the stage to the studio, from the silver screen to radio waves. 3 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for music, film, and radio are symbols of his wide-reaching influence. Crosby inspired future artists, including those like Michael Bublé, who followed in his footsteps. Bing Crosby, one of the greatest music legends in history, left the world with a musical legacy that can never be forgotten. But behind the spotlight and emotional ballads was a life filled with tragedy, broken relationships, and a persona that contrasted sharply with what he presented to the public. What do you think of Crosby's career and life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story interesting and want to continue exploring the mysteries behind music legends and complex lives, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any captivating stories, and turn on notifications.